Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Moss again here at allpointstv.com and also WFOV 92.1. We're glad to have you with us this afternoon on Monday at 2 o'clock. Hope you're still around for the next hour, and we hope to bring you some information that you're not getting anywhere else. We're always glad to have you with us because we know you can do some other things with your time, and we value the fact that you are a part of our audience, and we try to do what we can here to make sure that it's worth the time that you're putting in with us. We are glad to be doing this program, and we are happy to have the audience that we have. We don't have the largest audience, but we have the one that's most informed. And so we're doing what we can to maintain that. We don't look for the largest audience, as a matter of fact. We just look for the ones that are really interested in imparting some different information than what's coming across some of the alphabet soup stations out there, imparting what amounts to a lot of noise. And we're trying to come behind them to clean up some of the things that they're doing. We want to stand for the truth. And I have to tell you that we don't care who the truth hits, and we don't care who doesn't like it. The fact is that if the truth is to be silenced, then all is lost in this country. And I would like to think that we stand for trying to be truthful in what we report. And of course, when you do that, you make a lot of waves, and a lot of persons do not like what you're doing. When I say we, I'm talking about myself primarily, but we as a unit here at allpointstv.com, and to an extent, I think I can speak for WFOV, we like to make waves, and we have as a secondary aspect to our programming how it is to be seen by those who might not want to have a more truthful orientation, because there's so much that goes on right now in this politically correct environment that we have people that are speaking to that which at one time was considered outside of the mainstream. Now that which is in the mainstream is based upon whether or not it's politically correct. We don't follow that particular paradigm, and we are standing apart from it in a lot of ways. I want to, first let me start off talking about some things that you might have missed last weekend. I know everybody was talking about the fight that occurred this past Saturday, and I want to make a couple of points about that no one is making about this upset that occurred last weekend when Andy Ruiz, who wasn't considered one of the top fighters, beat Anthony Joshua, the fighter from England. And this will go down as the biggest upset in boxing history. Not that we haven't had some other upsets of the same magnitude as this one was, but there was none that was in the same financial vein as this was. If this fight had not gone the way that it did, then it would have set up a mega multi-$100 million fight between Deontay Wilder and Anthony Joshua. So that moment passed this past weekend, and so all of the things that kept on, they kept putting this fight off, because the idea was this could probably be $1 billion fight. Just continue to build it. First of all, clean up the fight with Tyson Fury and Ruiz, and have no doubt about the fact that the top two fighters out there in the heavyweight division was Anthony Joshua and Deontay Wilder, and then get them to then decide who the champion is of the heavyweight division. And that went down the drain. They just waited too long, and the outcome of that fight has killed the cash cow that would have been the fact if that fight had come off. But fate had another reason for what is going to occur in the future, and it will not be the same financial situation that it would have been if you'd had two undefeated champions fighting each other. That was a humongous loss, financial loss, and also the fact that it was an upset in having a person whom many persons thought was physically unable to win, because you look at his physicality and you look at how most boxers look in the ring, very, cut and so on. And that's not Andy Ruiz, who looks like some are comparing him to this fighter named Butterbean. That's not really the point I want to make. I wanted to make another point. I mean, I do understand the financial ramifications of the fight and so on and so forth, but I want you to understand something else that occurred that missed all the people. And that is what Ruiz said after the fight was over, that he wants to take the championship and take it to Mexico in front of his people. Now, all of you people out there that tell me that when you touch down on the soil of America and you're born here in the United States, then you are a citizen of the United States. So, okay, taking your word for it, that's the way you feel, then why isn't it that you didn't get upset when a person born in this country, and Andy Ruiz was born in the United States, why is it you didn't get upset when the flag that was in back of him was a Mexican flag and not the United States flag? Or another question to be asked is, how is it that Anthony Joshua, a black person, was a champion before he was dethroned this past weekend? How was he the champion of Great Britain, with a Nigerian father and an English mother? How is it that he was the British champion, but Ruiz is being touted as the first Mexican champion? I'm just raising that question because you tell me that when you are born in the United States, you automatically an American. And I didn't see you object to it, but I didn't see any semblance of the American flag that they were, in fact, putting it back of Ruiz. And Ruiz did not see himself as winning this championship for the United States. He wants to take it to Mexico and let the Mexican people see they have a champion. So, I mean, the balkanization of America, yeah, it's pretty well complete because we've accepted a lot of things, the import of which we have yet to discern how that continues to splinter this country and so on and so forth. So he is a Mexican champion. He's the first person of Mexican descent to win the championship. He's not the first Hispanic, by the way, to win the championship, because that would go to a person named John Ruiz. But they're now saying Mexican, so then the Hispanic is a more general umbrella type of identification of the group. But specifically, he's the first person of Mexican descent. But he's identifying, it's okay to be the first person of Mexican descent, but he's identifying with Mexico. He's not identifying with the United States. And I want to know why you didn't have an objection or have some problem with that, since you are fighting so badly for everybody that's born here on the soil of the United States automatically becomes a citizen of the country. Why didn't we see some evidence of that being the prevailing view this past weekend, when a person was born here was not in fact identifying with the United States? He brought the championship back to the United States. You don't have to carry it to Mexico, where you fled from, or not you, because you were born here, but your parents, or certainly your grandparents, came to the United States seeking asylum, and we are in fact creating an environment through which this fractionalization of the country can be sustained by going through a list of, if you speak English, press this number. If you speak Spanish, press that number, and all this other stuff that we're doing in this country. And we don't even realize the import of what that is doing in terms of tearing this country, splitting this country apart. And people want to know why it is that we have so much friction in the United States by these ridiculous politicians. Okay, so you can be a fight fan. I'm not knocking the fact that Ruiz defeated Anthony Joshua, I'm just raising another question that I didn't see anybody raising in terms of the outcome of this fight and what happened in the aftermath of the fight, and how how these fighters identified themselves. One way in terms of the British fighter, a different way in terms of the fighter in the United States. And the question I'm raising is why is that? Why is that okay? Why isn't the American flag central? People are coming here, even in these these illegal immigrants coming into the country. And they claim they're fleeing from their country. They're saying that they're seeking asylum in the United States because what they represent, either their political views or their sexual orientation or some other reason, they're seeking asylum from their country. Yet we see them carrying their flag on the way to the United States. And when they get here, after having had asylum, they continue to identify with the country they fled from. And we don't see any problems that is creating in the environment that we are going to pay for down the line, because this balkanization that we are in fact encouraging does have a consequence. And it will play out at some point in the future. If you don't think that's a problem, then look at what's happening with Ilham Omar from Minnesota, where they have a large Somalian population in Minnesota. Look at how she's in the Congress. And if she has any affinity for this country, although she was given asylum from having lived in refugee camps in Kenya, so she left Somalia, ended up in the Muslim community in Kenya, which of course has a large Muslim population in Kenya, which is a part of the Swahili coast. The Muslim influence on the east coast of Africa. You can see that her orientation in this country is anti-American. She never speaks to anything that this country represents, any of its ideals, any of its allies in terms of its alliance with Israel, for example, and so on. And she's always very critical of anything that the president does. And she is in alliance with Tlaib, who made the statement before she took office that they are going to impeach this, and she used that MF word. These people are very hostile, and no one's raising an eyebrow about it, but I'm raising an eyebrow about it because I know where this has led to in history and where it's going to lead to here. There's not going to be an exception in the United States. It's going to lead to the same thing here that's led to other places which have been fractionalized by these divisions. You continue to let people come here and not buy into the American ideals, and you continue to turn your back on the founding ideals of this country, where nobody thinks about what James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton, one person has been forgotten, George Mason, and a whole host of others, and what they were trying to do in giving this country a standard of behavior that would set it apart from all the other countries in the world, founded very different than other countries in the world, because our founding is based upon some documentary things and claims were made in our documents, and no other country on the planet can claim that. At the birth of the country, there were foundational ideals that were embedded in the constitutional fabric of the United States, and there's not one other country that can make that claim, and that's the exceptionalism of the United States, not these politicians. I'm here to tell you that in case you didn't know it. So although we saw the fight last weekend, I do want to raise some implications of the fight that seems to have escaped all of the discussion that I heard, and I was listening to a lot of it because I got a Sunday morning at 2:30, and I'm thinking I'm going to listen to the commentators on YouTube telling me about what round Ruiz was knocked out in, because I was one of those persons that did not give him a shot to win the championship too. And so I'm just knowing this guy's going to get knocked out, and I'm going to wake up and find out what round that he got knocked out in, only to turn on the YouTube channel, and I can't figure out, I am not fully awakened at that point. I'm still like in a little bit of a daze, and I couldn't figure out why they're interviewing Ruiz. Shouldn't they be able to interview the champion? And then a couple of minutes into the discussion, I'm learning that Anthony Joshua got knocked out in the 7th round. And that was, I'm sitting there, I'm a boxing fan, I'm sitting there stunned. But I was interested in what happened in the aftermath of the fight. And what was happening in the aftermath of the fight, maybe everybody else turned off in terms of what was really of some political consequence in this fight, and that was the flag issue. And we don't tend to understand the flag issue in our documents. We don't understand it in terms of Article 1, Section 2, Clause 5, in terms of the natural-born citizenship claim made by the framers. We don't even understand that because the framers made it very clear that being natural-born, which is the litmus test for being eligible for the president, is a flag issue, and that's the only issue it is that separates it from the others. The others have a age requirement. They all, both the senators and members of the House and the president, have an age requirement. They have a residence requirement, 7 years in the House, 9 years in the Senate, 14 years residence in the United States. But for the president above that standard is that the president must be a natural-born citizen of the United States, and not and none of the others have that requirement. And they have that requirement because the president is singularly the person over the entire executive branch of government. If he's treasonous, you cannot, in fact, dilute his treasonous behavior with a whole lot of others that are hosted inside of the same political body. He's singularly the head of a department of the branch of government all by himself, or in the future, maybe herself. We are not there yet because we have not had, it's just like a black candidate. We have not had a candidate that, we certainly didn't have one in 2016, and not because there's a glass ceiling, but because we have not had a candidate that has run for that office before that we could get behind and support and not make a bigger mistake. And if we had voted in Hillary Clinton in 2016, we would have made a big mistake. Because we would have had, it's just like what Donald Trump said, we would have had a criminal in the White House. We would have turned our back on the evidence, and we would have elected a stone criminal to the presidency. Okay, the flag issue is very important. It is embedded in our constitutional fabric. The President of the United States must be singularly, as an office holder, a natural-born citizen. And that means born in the United States. I have to tell you something. That means John McCain was not eligible to run for president, and that's why I didn't vote for him. In terms of the citizenship aspect, Barack Obama was a better candidate. Not that Obama was anything. Obama was a usurper in a different way. I'm here to say some things that miss the purview of the people in this country, because you don't get it. Because you've been to those indoctrination centers, and what they did was they taught you out of your mind. These are indoctrination centers. And by the time you come out of those schools, those small s schools, schools, small s, those schools, and they got me, when I was at the university, they got mad at me for saying that the university was a school. Wanted me to say university. I was not going to say university. I was going to say school.
Why don't you make because I always wonder because you have a university, but they'll have like when you look at their internal documents, they'll say College of Arts and Sciences, College of Humanities. It's like there's like separate entities within a university, correct?
Right.
Is that the way the system works, or? I mean, I was at university. I worked at the University of Michigan, but they had a College of Arts and Sciences. They had this college.
Right.
U of M Ann Arbor's got more colleges within the university.
Yeah, it's the reason why the reason why they call it a university is supposed to be all encompassing. But I tell you what you do on these university campuses today: go in there and try to talk outside of the box that you're in. You're placed in a box in these universities. And you go in there and you start talking outside the box as if you really believe this is a university, meaning that it has a universal purpose and that it has universal acceptance. That is, this view can be debated and that view can be debated, and they both have validity based upon whether or not they have something that backs up the point of view. Go ahead and try to do that.
One place, I guess, that's got the college.
See how universal it is.
London School of Economics, I guess, has all stripes of political economists in there. I mean, it was actually started by socialists, but then Hayek was brought in there and stuff like that. And he was the one that pushed for he's the one that promulgated the ideas of von Mises. Mm-hmm. So I mean in that sense, the London School of Economics, they had like the Fabian socialists, they had these people, they had the communists. They were all fairly represented there. I mean, so I would say that college, from my understanding of it, would probably fit the bill to be a more of a university setting than probably 99% of the rest of even as much as I like Hillsdale. If you want to go by that, it's probably pretty biased. There's a strong bias on campus, which is probably good to balance it out what's going on with the rest of the campuses. Hillsdale's only one out of thousands that would be, on the more conservative.
I'm glad you said that, because Hillsdale is biased in terms of the college being embedded in the documents that are the founding strictures of the country. So they are biased, but they are biased toward James Madison and the founders. So they in other words, they are constitutionally biased because they're grounded in what the framers, what the founders had in mind in terms of committing this country to. And they're trying to hold on to those values of our tradition. So I think that is what glues the country together. What we are doing that's outside of that, and Hillsdale College is almost unique in that regard, although you do have some person inside of, like Auburn University, and you have at Loyola University, you mentioned John Mises, you do have some of the persons from the philosophy of Ludwig von Mises, and they're inside of a larger structure. But you do have people like Thomas Woods, one of my favorite writers, Thomas De Lorenzo, and you mentioned the person who wrote the book in '44. You mentioned F.A. Hayek, The Road to Serfdom. And they were trying to get us off. They're trying to get us off that road, because the road to serfdom is to move away from what Madison and all of those framers were putting in place for the United States. They want us to forget that, and if we ever abandon it, and to the extent we've already abandoned it, we have done that to our detriment. We don't even realize how much of a corner we turned in the election of 2016. And I'm just waiting to see what the United States does in 2020, because what we did in 2016, in order to get this job done, we're going to have to continue what we did in that particular election and do it again and do it again and do it again until we get it right. But some of these people that are running for office right now, they don't have any good intent toward this country. And that includes this woman that was on Fox last night. In these town halls that they're doing. Let me ask Chris Wallace this question that they're doing on Fox. Want to ask him, this is a question for you, Chris Wallace. You're doing those town halls and bringing those Democrats into Fox. Let me ask you why. I'll wait for that answer. I'll ask you why are you bringing them in there, and I'll give you the answer on the other side of the break. We're going to take a break now with WFOV, and they'll be back with us in 4 minutes. And as I always say, when you take your break, we'll be very glad when you come back because we want to maintain both audiences, and we won't be very far. I'll make sure that we don't move too far away from where we were when you left for the 4-minute break. So with that, we'll see you in 4 minutes. Why, Chris Wallace, why are you hosting town hall meetings on Fox Network? I mean, aren't you the one that raised the question before the election when you were so assured that Hillary Clinton was going to be the president? Then you go for the polls and say that, and did not give Donald Trump a chance to win the presidency. Didn't you ask the question during the third debate when it looked like it was a done deal based on all the polls saying pretty much the same thing, that Donald Trump had no shot at winning the presidency? It was going to be a landslide, and that Hillary Clinton, may well have gotten as many as 400 electoral votes out of the 538 electoral votes, and it was going to be a overwhelming embarrassment to Donald Trump's campaign because the American people had turned against him, and so on and so forth. And we held that in the public view until November the 8th. And even on that date, if you notice it, they held that up until around 9, 10 o'clock as they refused to report those states where Donald Trump was doing well, to make it appear that something was actually going on differently on the day of the election than what was going on, because that was a cover-up also, until they could not cover up any longer, because it's very clear that the blue wall that was supposed to have been up there as a barrier of non-penetrable barrier beyond which Donald Trump could not get through, that blue wall was being blown apart. Wisconsin and so on, and those other states, North Carolina, 30 states altogether.
You know, one time on a local election, my dad got a mailing from one of the candidates, and he was going to vote for this guy. And it says, so and so, the next mayor or whatever it was, welcome, thanks you and all this. So this is before the election is held. My dad wadded it up and threw it in the paper, the trash. And I said, well, he was kind of seeming angry. I said, what's about it? He said, I don't like anybody who presumes they're going to win months or weeks away from the election. Right. I said, well, you like this guy? He said, yeah, but he's already taken our vote for granted.
Right.
And so he said, I'm not going to vote for the SOB. And so he didn't, and he had been, persuaded before this, but he just took that as a sign of contempt and arrogance. And he didn't like either one of those qualities in a candidate.
John, do you know where the Democrats are going to hold their convention next year?
Where's that?
They're going to hold their convention in Wisconsin.
Oh, yeah. They're going to say...
Yeah, they're telling us Russia caused the election, but look at all the actions that they are, in fact, engaged in, showing that they don't believe that. They know exactly why they lost this election. Hillary Clinton didn't go into Wisconsin, and they were outflanked by the Donald Trump campaign. They did not believe the hype and just kept working while they were, in fact, bragging about how the election was over. Everyone bought into that on the Democratic Party side. Donald Trump didn't buy into it because this man is not a loser. But now I was asking a question to Chris Wallace. Mr. Wallace, why are you having those town halls by people that like Gillibrand, Kirsty Gillibrand, and these other airheads? Buttigieg, what's his name, from Indiana, the mayor. They're not saying anything, and it couldn't be that they're having the solutions, because politicians don't have any solutions to problems, because there are no solutions to problems politically, only trade-offs. No problems are solved through the political process, and if they are, which problems are they? You don't solve problems in the political process. You trade this problem for that problem, but in the elimination of that problem, it creates another problem in its place. It's just like the medicine advertised on television. You take the medicine for this thing, but how much of the time they spend in the commercial to tell us about what then the medicine that you take for this condition is creating other symptoms and other problems that you didn't have before you took it. So it treats this problem, but in the process of treating this problem, it creates another problem that was not there before the treatment was in fact instituted. And the same thing in politics.
What do politicians have at their disposal? Taxation. That's what I mean.
And the guns.
And everything, and once they get started, they pay for it. They're not going to cut it. Because guess what? The people who are being served by that program or idea is not going to let that go, and they're going to lose that part. It's hard to keep everything. See, that's the thing is economic freedom is freedom, and you cannot tell especially a Democrat, but neither one of these parties actually seriously talking
both
about.
parties are a problem.
Looking at it, they're spending. We don't need everything we're paying for. We don't need everything we're paying for.
Every solution that they apply has to do with our money and their guns. When they start telling you about free, you don't see that they're placing a gun in the room, because the government does not have resources. And when they start talking about free, they're talking about, first of all, imposing a penalty upon your assets. And because we don't tend to voluntarily give our assets to them, then they do it by the pointing of a gun at us. And if you don't think a gun is being pointed at you, simply resist the confiscation of your resources and see what happens.
And guess what? That local police officer you see and you say hi to the 7-Eleven or whatever convenience store, he's part of that, okay? So, I mean, I know you and I will differ on that maybe, but I look at them, there's all part of the same apparatus. They are armed, and the cops are not here for helping us out. They are revenue source getters. That's what they are. Mm-hmm. That's what they are for. So don't think they're there to help you out. They don't give a rat's butt about what happens to you. They're there to take money back to their master, which is the basic. We're arming these people. With our money, we're allowing them to buy weapons and also allowing them to pass ordinances and laws and statutes on us that has the force of a law upon us. There's a distinction between all these.
Yeah, John, we don't really disagree with that. I don't disagree with you on that. What I would do is I would look at the food chain and see where the police officer is on the ladder, on the hierarchy of policymaking.
But they're willing to be signed on to be the thugs for them.
It's a job for them.
It's a job for them, and I don't see anything noble about it. Sorry, I don't. I don't see anything noble about it.
But what happens is that when you had the Garner case in New York, for example, where this is the one where they went off with this I can't breathe. Then other one is hands up, don't shoot, and so the officer gets all of the blame. In New York, it was when Garner died. Everybody was going around, saying "I can't breathe" to mimic what he said, in terms of the officers getting blamed for people going off and thinking that when he said he couldn't breathe, he was being choked to death. You know what? People do not pay attention, and that's not what happened. You see, if he was being choked, if here's what people see. That's why I said we have to have this program, because a lot of things need to be clarified. Because we're not in the clarity business; we're in the confusion business. That's how they keep us divided against each other. They try to confuse the environment. So we are in here in this confusion, going at each other's throat. And in conflict all the time. When Garner said, "I can't breathe," that's very important, particularly if you factor in that he was asthmatic. And so, "I can't breathe." Why is that important? Because if it had been an unusual situation that he had never faced before, let's say that he had been choked, he would have said that, because that stands outside of what usually happens. But when he said, "I can't breathe," that is typical of the condition of somebody that's asthmatic. If it had been, he was choked, if they were choking him, he would have said, "You're choking me." He never said that, "I can't breathe." And the reason why he couldn't breathe is because in order to take him down, because he was resisting, they were sitting on his chest because this is a big person, to bring him in compliance with what they had been sent out there to do by de Blasio, who now wants to run for president. Anybody against him running for president? No, because you don't see his role in it. The reason why he's down there is because in the city of New York, they have passed a tax. This is again about taxation. They passed a tax on cigarettes and made, they like to talk about the sin tax. They want to say it's a sin tax. So they're against sin, right? Here are the politicians, the biggest sinners on the planet, against sin. So they put a sin tax where people think they're trying to bring the vices under control. So they raise the tax on the cigarettes. People think the politicians are acting in a benevolent way, but it's revenue grabbing. So Garner's out there selling cigarettes because if you sell them individually, they can pay less money there on the street because you create a black market for it, and he's out on the street, and he's actually reducing revenue to the state. And that's why de Blasio had him out there. And he goes out there, they go out there, sent by de Blasio and the city fathers there to stop the noncompliance of the taxation policies in New York. And when he, Garner, dies in terms of them enforcing the law, they ain't out there because they sent themselves out there. They're out there because de Blasio sent them out there. So now the officers were in fact choking them to death.
I think it's true about
Pure nonsense.
de Blasio. I just found out too. That's not his real name. De Blasio is not his real name. He's changed his name. So I really question people doing that. Why do you change your name for? Because I mean, and I know a lot of people. I can tell you some stories off air because I don't want to. I'd really anger some people, but anyway, it's like I have a tendency to not trust people I know of. I mean, I can see first name because mom and dad stuck you with a moniker you didn't care for, but he changed everything about it. It's not his name at all. So I'd like to know why he did that for, because usually it's because it escapes some kind of stuff she did in the past. So that's really begs the question of what do you do in that past, you know?
Yeah, anytime you have that, for example, you remember the book called The Book of Lists, put out by Irvin Wallace, Amy Wallace,
yeah,
and David Walaczewski. Well, Walaczewski there is the family name.
Is that Wallace is like the name that they changed it to, right?
As a way of assimilating in the culture, because if you say Walaczewski, we know automatically that's Polish and also Jewish.
My family never did that. I have family members with my last names are with the SKI or SKY,
right? And
so I mean we never change the name. So why would so I just say I don't say them because I don't want to say I don't want a lot of my family is not libertarians or conservatives. They're on the other side, and we don't associate. But anyway, they have the SKY or SKI name, and they were either Polish or Czech or Croat or whatever, and So I mean, we stuck with it.
If you have a certain amount of nativism in place, and you stand out as a sore thumb, the way you actually will get rid of the standing out from the crowd, if being different brings about ostracism in your group, you change that which makes you stand out, and just like even language does that. So you're standing out because I remember when in my neighborhood, I'm from Birmingham, Alabama. At the time, they had these segregated institutions and that. And as a child, somebody set a store up in our neighborhood, and I kept hearing the mumbling going on in the area where we lived. It was all black community, because over here were the blacks, over there were the other members of the city. So you were congested here. So a person of Hispanic background set up a store in the neighborhood, and I kept hearing all the mumblings about they're setting up this store and the blah blah. And so I'm trying to figure out why is everybody upset about it. I went down there and sat in that store all day trying to figure out what all the mumbling was about. They were mad because on this corner with Mr. McHellen's store, over there was another black proprietor. Over here was the Ice House. Over there on the other side was Saints Funeral Home. There was Mr. Hines Shoe Repair. Over there, Mr. McNeil's barber shop. So it's like a little area that, in the segregated environment, blacks is an economy all of their own. So here was somebody standing out, and they also were speaking Spanish, and we can do it now, and we don't raise an eyebrows about it. Back in that time period, we were turning our nose down. They couldn't even speak the language. That was a big deal back in that time period. Of course, everything politically correct now, so you can do whatever. But standing out is not always a very good thing. And you have to understand time and place and how you have to blend in. Sometimes you have to know, I guess that song by Rogers, know when to hold them and know when to fold them. If you don't know if you know time and place, you can have a problem. So I'm just making the point that when people stand out, sometimes that creates a problem. And nobody would think that Walachinsky is the son of Amy Wallace and Irvin Wallace. That's their son. Irvin Wallace, Amy Wallace, and David Walachinsky, same family. But the father and the mother changed their name as to assimilate so as to get the advantage. The son didn't have to do that because the parents were successful. So he could, stand a little taller. But that's at least it doesn't create the factionalization that we have where everybody now is claiming, separateness and so on and so forth. I mean, we have to have an American identity. It doesn't mean you have to lose all of the aspects of your more specific identity, but the overarching identity is that we all are Americans. And that's something that politicians do not get a benefit from. That's why they always try to show how this one is different from that one, and over here and over there, and this one over here has this view, and over here this view is not allowed. They love that. That's why I'm listening to Jill Brand last night. I mean, I couldn't hardly listen to it, quite frankly, but the little part that I did hear after I couldn't take it anymore was her trying to talk about a woman ought to have the right to determine how many children she should have and when. And she wasn't talking about you just decide to get married later on, or when you get married, you decide that you're going to postpone your family until you begin having children. You're going to postpone that until you get your job under control, get some money in the bank. You're going to postpone those things. No, they're talking about if you get pregnant during that time period, then you ought to be able to determine when you're going to have children and how many of your children you're going to have by, in fact, aborting the children once they're here. Now, you can buy that all you want to. I'm telling you, I don't buy it. I remember the community when that standard was not in place. And this standard you have right now, and these people are running as leaders of this country, they're leaders of the country, and they're telling us that we ought to, in fact, look at our children as fetus. Let me tell you something about a fetus. See, I'm not politically correct. Let me tell you something about a fetus. A fetus is a child continued. Just like an egg is not an egg. An egg is a chicken continued. That is, say a thing is not what it is what it is what it's intending to be. And so you say fetus. But a fetus is a child continued. What is a caterpillar? A caterpillar is a butterfly continued. An acorn, this is in the evolutionary design. An acorn is a tree trying to come into existence. And you Negroes out there that think you qualified to come behind me and say anything. A Negro is a black man trying to come into existence. And most of you are Negroes and don't even know it. You never grew up. That's why I was telling you last week. You're out here tearing down these monuments because you don't know anything. And they got you so confused. Got you out here tearing down monuments of those persons that stood up and told the federal government that states' rights have a place in this country. And this all-encompassing federal government that is in fact overwhelming the rights of the states will not be tolerated anymore. And they picked up their weapons against the federal government. And that's what this war was about. You may think it's about somebody fighting 100% of the people, including the blacks, are fighting a war to keep 6% of the population in power through them owning slaves. But it ain't 6% of the people fighting, it's 100% of the people fighting. The whole South is fighting. And that includes the blacks in the South also. And that's why I read last week on Memorial Day, the real history of Memorial Day, to invite all of the ones who martyred themselves for the cause of freedom in this country. And that's as much Robert E. Lee as it is anyone else. In fact, Robert E. Lee is one of my heroes. Because unlike Ulysses S. Grant, Robert E. Lee didn't own any slaves. And Ulysses S. Grant did.
Because to Robert E. Lee, he was a Virginian, and that came first. The idea of a national membership to a national government came secondary, tertiary for him. And that's what he saw his fellow Virginians being attacked, basically. So that's what it was. I mean, he knew the people. He was connected to them. It wasn't an abstraction. They were very real to him. I used to hate the South too. My mom was from immigrant background, and they got harassed by the KKK. A lot of them were Southerners. But as you look at the South, or if you look at the documents where the country was founded upon, there's no way you can get around the fact that they were standing on those principles, much more than the Union side.
That's why, John, we did a program about a month ago, and I was asking the viewers how many of them have seen the Constitution of the Confederate States. And I already knew the answer. They don't bring you into contact with the Constitution of the Confederate States because people will be surprised and shocked, in fact, stunned to find out that it's the same Constitution that they had in the United States. Had a provision in there that's Article 1, Section 9, which was the completion of the clause that was that had in it the slave trade, the banning of the slave trade. The Confederate Constitution, because it was at that point a fait accompli, where they completed that. The Article 1, Section 9 says they could not pass a law to end the slave trade for 20 years after the ratification of the Constitution, which meant that the first year it could be ended was 1808, since the Constitution would have been ratified in 1788. That meant for 20 years you could not move against the bringing slaves into the country. Well, the Confederate Constitution is drafted in 1861. That Constitution has in it the prohibition against the slave trade, because it is in the aftermath of that. So they even had that as part of the Constitution of the Confederate States. I'm not telling you what I think. I'm telling you what I know. I read the Constitution of the Confederate States, and I can tell you this: the first veto of a bill passed by the Confederate by the Confederate legislature was someone trying to violate the provision of Article 1, Section 9, where they were saying, well, if the slaves came from some other parts of the didn't come from Africa but came from some other place, then that could be rescinded as the law. And what Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy, did, his first veto was to say no. Article 1, Section 9 says no introduction of slaves through the slave trade. And he vetoed that law, and his veto was not overridden, which would have taken 2/3 vote in the House and 2/3 vote in the Senate, just like it does in the Constitution of the United States. And they did not get 2/3 vote to override it. They're not teaching that in the classroom because they want to sustain this nonsense that this war is over slavery. This war is not over slavery. In fact, it had nothing to do with slavery. As a peripheral issue, as it relates to economics, that slavery was brought about based upon the fact that the South is enriching itself through the enslavement and so on and so forth. Economically, there's economic interest in that's involved. But to say the war is over slavery as a specific argument against the institution, that's not true, and it cannot be sustained by the inaugural address of Abraham Lincoln that was given March the 4th, 1861, and I dare any historian to say otherwise. That includes Stephen Oates. I dare him to say otherwise. I read his books. Stephen Oates on page on page 48 of your book, with malice toward none. What do you have on that page? Somebody go and read page 48, the softback version of Stephen Oates' book, and ask when he talks about Joshua Speed, ask him what is he hiding on that page there with his dishonest self. I mean, I respect Stephen Oates' writings. Don't get me wrong. He writes very well and very clearly, but he's dishonest. And for him to even title his book with malice toward none, among other books he's written, shows dishonesty, because what he's doing in that is quoting the third or fourth paragraph of the second inaugural address of Abraham Lincoln, the one he gave March the 4th, 1865. That's not the first inaugural with malice toward none. That's after 600,000 persons have been killed, and they have the nerve to put in his inaugural address, the second one, with malice toward none, and there are 600,000 persons laying on that battlefield. And that man had the nerve to say that. You know, I tell you something about I'm talking about this hypocrisy. I'm still talking about the hypocrisy. It ain't just that fight last weekend. I'm talking about this hypocrisy of how you are against the government being against its people in Venezuela right now. How do you do that? How do you out of one side of your mouth, you're so alarmed and so outraged about what Nicolas Maduro is doing in Venezuela? They're saying he turned against his people. Guaido is the president of the legitimate president of Venezuela, and that you are supporting the leader of Venezuela. You're not interfering with the election down there. You're not interfering with the internal affairs of Venezuela, with the CIA out there stirring that mess up. And I got it from a reporter who went down there to look at what's going on down there. And I can tell you this, Guaido doesn't have any support down there. And that's why what was in the street ain't in the street anymore. Because it was not an uprising of the people. They made it appear that in this fake news media. But here you are talking about how you against someone shooting down their own citizens. And you got the greatest president this country has produced did the same thing. People shooting at each other in this country, and they made him, and showing you how brainwashed they have you, they have him as the greatest president this country has produced, and I object to it. No wonder John Wilkes Booth said when, after assassinating Lincoln, sic semper tyrannis, to all tyrants, so be it. Because that's exactly what Abraham Lincoln was. And he made this tyrant. This man had no respect for the Constitution, no respect for the right of the sovereign states to rescind their verdict of coming into the unity if, in fact, it became disobedient to the claims were made in order to get their allegiance to forming the polity. Once you, in fact, violate the tenets of which the claims were made to bring about the United States, then it was their right, it was their duty to alter that particular polity or to abolish it. And that's what they were doing. That's what this book is talking about. Nullification, how to resist federal tyranny in the 21st century. And we are going to have to do what Marvin Gaye said at some point in time if they don't stop what they're doing, taking our liberty from us under the pretense that we are endangered if they don't do it. The climate change, we're going to burn up in 12 years. People not even climatologists telling us the world is going to end in 12 years. And see, I'm talking about brainwashing. I'm surprised that Christians will buy that one, because in the Christian Bible, in the church, They say even Jesus wasn't told by God what the time would be. That is embedded in God's own makeup and wasn't shared with God's only begotten Son. Although begotten in terms of the incarnation, but in terms of the idea of Jesus, the idea of it is Jesus was the first of creation, the first thing that was created. But the incarnation from the spiritual dimension of his being. I'm not teaching religion. I'm just simply trying to explain to you where you're off base. See, everybody starts, even it's so brainwashed. Everybody starts off with Jesus with the virgin birth. The idea of Jesus is that he is there at the very beginning of the creative principle. At the beginning of creation, the first thing that God created was in fact Jesus. That's the concept of Christianity. But the incarnation of it through Mary, which is the movement from the spirit base to the physical base. But if you say that you go along with that, then a whole lot of things then become clearer. Not only that, but also the fact that what would have happened if you had had universal abortion? Then the whole salvation thing comes apart. They got us so confused in this country. And we are going to continue to unravel it until we get it right. Because we are going to have to eventually stand up against these people that don't mean any good for this country and have changed the very paradigm upon which this country was based by the framers. And our fight is very clear. We have got to return this country back to its grounding points as intended by the framers, or all is lost in this country. And that's why I'll be watching in 2020 what's going to happen here, because we've got to get this fractionalization under control and return this country to its roots. Okay, I got to get out of here. I came here to say a lot of things. And again, I didn't get around to a whole lot of things that we should have talked about, but I'll be back next week and we'll continue this conversation. Until next week, I want you to follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.